Welcome back to another episode of the Evo 6 STI Killer presented by Koyorad. Today we've got a simple job for you, building the 4G63. Not gonna lie everyone, it's a little intimidating when you see it all laid out like this. It seems like there's an awful lot of work to do, but as you can see, we do have all the parts now. It's been a bit of a wait, so we apologize for the delay. We know you're anxious for us to get this car up and running too, but we now have what we need to do that, which means it's time to move on to actually going through the whole process of prepping this block and getting it ready for assembly. Making this process even more of an adventure for Pete and I is the fact that we've never built a 4G63 before. In fact, we've never really built a performance engine before. I did build a Honda D-Series motor 15 or 20 years ago with really like basic stuff and using like plastic gauge, which we'll show you later in this process to check bearing clearances, but this is a very primitive way of doing it and not that accurate. So we'll show you the best way to do it. And by we, I mean really it's going to be Andre at HP Academy here. So we have partnered with them on this. They've given us access to their Learn How to Build Engines course. So if you go to hpacademy.com, you can get all the details on this course, but it's basically a three-parter where they have an initial course, which is what they call their engine building fundamentals course, and it really goes through the basics, the fundamentals of how to build an engine, the tools you would need, how to use those tools, that kind of stuff. And then they have a practical engine building course, which if we jump to that, it's pretty impressive. They have 889 minutes in 73 separate videos in the practical engine building course, where it goes through the whole process of building an engine in, as the name would imply, a very practical way to show you how to do it. And better yet, there are three what they call worked examples in that course. And by worked examples, they mean they fully assemble three different engines in a very step-by-step way where you can see the entire process. Those three engines, I believe, are a 2JZ, an SR20, and an LS. So if you're building any of those three engines, they actually show you exactly how to do it. But the course is structured in a way that what they're teaching you applies really to any engine other than, say, a rotary engine. If you're building a piston engine, everything you need to know is in this course. As far as how to build an engine goes, it's really this practical engine building course that we're going to rely on. And in fact, one of the modules within that is called their 10-step process. So we're going to follow that process through and step-by-step work our way through what looks like an intimidating pile of parts here. But by breaking it down into more manageable pieces, I think it's going to be a relatively, I won't say easy, but a process that we can at least wrap our brains around. And we're going to be learning as we go here by watching these modules about how to use the tools properly. So follow along with us as we get started. So just looking at their 10-step process here, we have already done the first three steps here, which I'll explain momentarily. But before I do that, I should mention that if you want to buy this course, which normally retails for $199 on their website, they've very generously given us a $75 discount code. So that is a big discount. What's that, like 40% off? So if you look in the description, there's a discount code there that you can apply when buying this course on their website. I should also mention they have other courses. They have an engine tuning course, which will teach you how to tune the ECU in your car. And they're also working with another partner on a fabrication course as well. So they have a lot of great stuff going on there. They've got technical content on here. They've got a forum where you can ask them technical content. It's really a pretty amazing thing that they're offering for what I think is very reasonable money. So let's jump to step one here, which is initial preparation, which is really just about what do you need to have ready before you start pulling your engine and get ready for a build. Step two is stripping and inspecting, and we actually have a video on our channel about when we stripped and inspected that engine. And it turns out our 4G63 is in remarkably good condition. We took it to our engine machinist, which in step three here, they explain what machining processes you would typically do, which would include like honing the bores or overboring if you have damage to the cylinder sleeves, decking the block if the deck isn't true, all of that kind of stuff that you have done in a machine shop. But our machinist found that this block is actually in remarkably good condition. All he had to do was give it a light hone, so we haven't overbored it, so we're running the factory 85 mil bore. But he didn't have to deck the block because the deck was completely true, so he just gave that a cleanup. And he hot tanked it for us, and he took about a bunch of measurements of the crankshaft, which we'll get into later. But he's given this a very clean bill of health, so we have a really good starting point, and we're able to use what we hope are, standard clearance bearings, but we're going to check all those clearances in what is the step 6. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but let's go to step 4 here, which would be block preparation. So the first part of HP Academy's block preparation lesson, which is 18 minutes long, by the way, which gives you an idea how much detail is in that lesson, is if you have a cast iron block like we did, paint it. So as you can see, we painted it. You would have seen that last episode. And the next step is to clean all the threaded bolt holes. Most importantly being the head bolts, which hold the cylinder head to the block. So to do that, you need a cleaning tap, which is not your typical tap which you would use to, say, cut threads. A cleaning tap is designed to clean the threads, but not to cut new threads. So it's a very gentle way of removing dirt and debris from the threads, which is very important to do, by the way, because it will help you get the proper clamping force when you torque everything down. If you've got a bunch of dirt and debris in there, you're not going to get proper contact on the threads and the block, and so you may not have proper clamping force. So this is an important step to do. So important, in fact, that they can charge $65 for a cleaning tap. This is an M11 by 1.25 tap from ARP.
That is crazy.
That is insanely expensive for a single tap, but it's the only one I could find, and I could find it on Amazon and get it here like next day. So we paid a bit of a premium for it, but it's an unusual size. I don't think you can go to Home Depot or somewhere that would have normal taps and find a cleaning tap in this size. So plan ahead a bit on that. And Pete actually went so far as to buy this really nice maximum ratcheting tap tool. Super nice. So as Andre recommends, we just throw a bit of cutting oil on the tap here, which will help it do its job. I'm not going to go too crazy with this, and we will start on threaded bolt hole number 1 here. I have to say, when I first started putting the tap in there, it felt kind of tight, and I think I was just being overly cautious. I'm a little, maybe I'm nervous, Pete. I'm worried about messing up your motor. I don't want you to have any excuses when the STI crushes your Evo. So, but now it's going in there nicely. So, and this ratcheting tool is badass. I love it.
I know. The moment that I saw it, I was like, I need to have that.
Yeah.
It is such a great tool.
It's really weighty too. Like, it feels like a quality tool. You got this at Canadian Tire, I guess?
Yep.
And here we go, everybody. Let's see. Wow, that looks remarkably clean. Oh, you can see some debris there, right in there. But I do wonder if maybe Dave, our machinist, actually cleaned these for us. He is a very thorough, detailed-oriented man, so I have a sneaking suspicion he may have done this for us. But let's go ahead and do all of them anyway. Just even getting that much debris out of there, I think is worth the effort. So it's not a long process. Well, let's finish it off here. Just cleaning the tap off here, and you can see this was a completely clean rag when I started, and there is a lot of junk in here. So it's kind of deceiving when I first pulled the tap out, but I'm just still picking the gunk out of the sort of cleaning grooves here. So it's definitely worth doing.
Our next step here is to actually deburr and port this oil galley right here. There's actually a bunch of, I don't want to call it debris.
Basically?
Flashing, yeah. That's on the side here that we're gonna clean up. And the oil has to make a very sharp turn to get down into the engine there. And that turn right there also has a ton of sharp flashing. It's pretty much a jagged edge. So I'm just gonna come in here with my die grinder and just clean this up nicely. And by the way, another plug for the Milwaukee Fuel die grinder. This thing is the best. Look at this. There is no air hose. There's nothing. Super easy to use. And I can just be very, very precise and gentle here, just like that. All right, there we go. I think it's improved flow. I'm not gonna say by tremendous amounts, but it's certainly just smoothed out the edges and whatnot. So as you just saw, there now is a ton of metal shavings in here. So our next step is to completely clean this block.
man, we are cranking through our Napa CRC brake clean, but it does an amazing job. It's great having this little straw in here. It allows you to get down into all the galleries really well, and we've given it a very thorough cleaning, and I must admit, cranking forced air through all those galleries, you really do see a lot of stuff coming out. So I am now covered in it, but we've given it a really thorough going over, and now I'm just going to give the cylinder walls a final cleaning with some WD-40 here, which I guess helps maybe protect it from any kind of corrosion while the block's sitting around, but it's also apparently a really good cleaning agent for the cylinder walls for some reason. Not really sure of the science of that, but I'm just following the instructions here, everybody. So, and I gotta say, I'm kind of embarrassed by my first engine building experience with that old Honda D-Series, because this engine was hot tanked, and that Honda engine was hot tanked, and I just assumed that meant it was spotless. But now that we've gone through this, now that even though it was hot tanked, I can see, wow, there's still a lot of cleaning that you should really do. The next step in our process is parts balancing, and for that I have brought out our JE Ultra Series pistons. These are a very special forging made of 2618 material using JE's proprietary forging technology that aligns the grain structure in the material itself such that it reinforces the most important areas of the piston. So they can actually align the grain structure such that it's running against the forces that are acting on the piston. So it makes the piston much stronger. And as a result, you can either take weight out of it if you're trying to get the lightest, say, piston you would want for like a high RPM NA motor, or you can just leave it the same weight and it's about 20% stronger than a typical forged piston that doesn't have that kind of alignment in its molecular structure. So pretty impressive technology there. And as you can see, it's also got this ceramic coating on the top. That is designed to reject heat and keep the piston crown much cooler, which will allow it to live much longer in a high temperature, high boost environment. And just like the pistons that we used in our STI, we also used Ultra Series pistons in that. It has this perfect skirt coating on here, which you might think is just like a break-in coating or a friction reducing coating, and it does in fact reduce friction, but it's quite thick and it's designed to take the shape of the bore on initial startup. So it makes for a much better fitting piston, and it reduces piston slap, or basically eliminates piston slap. And if you ever used a forged piston before, when they're cold, they tend to slap in the bores because they haven't expanded yet. So this eliminates that, which is going to make it a much more like street-friendly setup with a very high-performing forged piston. So for us, the process that we're using with HB Academy here is now to balance the reciprocating parts. We're not actually going to balance the rods, which we'll explain to you in a minute, but we are going to balance the pistons. And to do that, we weigh each piston on this high accuracy scale here. This goes to 0.1 of a gram. And we're going to take weights of all four, and then we'll use the lightest one as our baseline, and we'll take weight out of the other three so that we have a matching set. So all four will weigh exactly the same when we're done. Sounds a little scary to be taking weight out of a piston, but based on what Andre from HB Academy has shown us, we think we can do it very easily and without removing any kind of strength from the piston whatsoever. As you can see, I've taken about half a gram now out of piston number one here, which is our heaviest of the four. And Pete and I have been discussing like how much more we can take out, and we're just not comfortable going any further than we've gone here. This isn't something we've ever done before. We just don't have any, basis for, judging how much weight to take out. And we had a chat with Andre at HB Academy about it, and he felt if we could get within a half gram of the lightest piston, that was a very reasonable number to get to. In fact, it's a much tighter tolerance than you'd see on like an OE piston anyway. So the other three pistons are all measuring out now at 26 grams even. This one is also at 26 even. Our lightest is at 25.5. So we could try to chase those ones down to 25.5 as well, and then we'd have a half a gram difference between the heaviest and the 3 lightest. Or we can just leave these 3 at 26 grams and have the lightest one at 25.5. Either way, we're going to have that one piston that's out by half a gram. So rather than doing a bunch of extra dremeling that we don't need to, we're going to leave the 3 at 26.0 and the lightest at 25.5 and move on from there. So
well, we measured the wrist pins too, right? And there's one that's slightly heavier. It's like 0.1 of a gram.
0.1 gram heavier, that's right.
So we'll match that one with the lightest piston.
Yes, and that is something that Andre does show you how to do in their module on this balancing process. He does match up the heaviest pistons with the lightest wrist pins and so on to try to, balance it out as much as you can. So we do have the benefit of gaining 1.1 gram back on that light piston, which we'll do. You can, of course, also balance the rods, but we're not going to be doing that because you need a special fixture to do that. The reason you need a special fixture is because you have to weigh the big end of the rod and the small end of the rod, because one end is reciprocating, the big end is reciprocating on the crank, and the other is rotating on the wrist pin. And those are different types of motion, so you have to balance each end to account for that. Without the fixture to do that, we have no way of doing it. And frankly, Andre said, at our power levels, we really don't need to be chasing that level of balancing. We're not revving this engine super high, and we're not pushing it that hard power-wise either. So we're going to move on from balancing at this point and start showing you our piston to bore clearances.
It is time to do some measuring. Theoretically, our pistons are a standard bore size of 85 millimeters, so they should drop into our block, which was given a clean bill of health by our machinist. So they should fit, no problem. However, we're going to double check that stuff because you just never really know. And in order to do that, what you need to do is measure the outside diameter of the piston. And because our JE pistons have this skirt coating, that adds a little extra layer. And what they've done is, as you can see, they've just left a little bit of a relief right there for us to be able to get our micrometer on there and measure that correctly. Now, this is where it gets tricky. Your normal micrometer looks like this, where it's got a flat surface, just as so. And if you try to put the piston in here, you're going to contact some of the surface. So these micrometer gauges have come with this cool little, I should show you this actually. It's just a ball. So it's a ball bearing right there with a rubber cap on it. And what it does is it goes on as such. And now that allows me to get a precise reading, which is 638 millimeters. And usually what you want to do is do this 3 or 4 times and just average out your number. And now we're going to take the gauge and drop it into our cylinder. And what you want to do is you want to be like half an inch up from the deck here. And again, it's a matter of like rotating it back and forth, as you can see, and finding the lowest number where it's reading. And as you can see, it's right around there. Wow, so we are pretty much perfectly in spec, which is 4.5 thou. So let's do the next one here. And this one is, yeah, you know what, I'd say that's 4.5 as well. And then this one here. This one's just a little bit less. I'd say like 4.4. And the last one here is, this one's a little bit looser. So I'd say like 4.6, 4.7. And then same thing, what we'll do is do the method again going this way just to make sure everything. But it looks like we are pretty much spot on.
Now that we've checked all our piston to bore clearances, it is time to move on to the next step in the process, and that is cleaning all of our engine components. You already saw us clean the engine block very thoroughly, but we're also meant to clean all of the engine internals, including the bearings. These are King bearings, and we cleaned them just by using some brake cleaner on a rag and wiping both the inner surface and outer surface. For the King bearings, we have gone with their XP race bearings. This is their big dog in performance for a number of reasons. They've packed a ton of technology into these bearings. I'll grab a topside one to just show you some of the tech that they've done here. So in a typical race bearing, the oil hole here, this oval hole, is often just a larger round hole, and that would cut out into the surface area of the bearing itself. And that reduces surface area and thus how well the bearing can remain oiled. So to give you all that surface area back, they've gone with this oval hole, plus they've cut the groove down the center to be deeper with more square shoulders. So they've narrowed that groove, but cut it deeper with squared shoulders, so it still moves the same amount of oil through it, but without the same loss of surface area. So they put a lot of thought into that. They're also made of a very special tri-metal formula or structure, which makes them 24% greater load carrying capacity, and I think it's 17% higher fatigue resistance. So these are an incredibly strong bearing, really designed to survive in the high load environment of a race engine, where you're seeing like mega piston speeds and very high cylinder pressures, which do put your bearings under extra load. So having a stronger bearing is very important in those circumstances. If you don't need all the technology packed into their race bearing, this XP race bearing, then they do offer OE and aftermarket style replacement bearings, which, as you can see, are more conventional looking. You can see it has the typical round oil hole and the more chamfered edges on the oil groove. So you've got less. If we do a side-by-side comparison here, you can see how it has less surface area and a wider groove, and how that oil hole cuts into the surface area of the bearing itself. So this OE or aftermarket style bearing is totally appropriate for a stock rebuild or a mildly upgraded engine. Our machinist actually took measurements of the crankshaft for us. So these are the main journal measurements, and these are the raw journal measurements up here. And we've actually confirmed his main journal measurements with our own mic, which gave us the identical number. So we know we've got good numbers there. And with that number, we can set our bore gauge to this. And the bore we will measure is going to be our bearing clearance. So now we're going to install our bearings in the cradle and in the motor. We'll torque that down, and with the bearings in place, that'll be our bore that would then put our bore gauge in to measure our clearances, and that way we'll find out if we're in spec. Just like that, we have checked our bearing clearances on the rods and the crank, and they are looking really good. We are on spec, and that's pretty exciting news, because that means in the next episode we can move on to final assembly of the short block. And by the way, let us know in the comment section if you feel like we're going too deep on this tech. Are we putting you to sleep with this much in-depth tech, or do you want us to go even deeper? And frankly, if you do want us to go deeper, I would recommend jumping over to hpacademy.com, where they have a ton of technical information. If you sign up for any of their programs, whether it's their engine building program or their ECU tuning program, they also have blog posts there that are super technical. They have a forum there where you can ask Andre any kind of technical questions you might have. And you might be asking yourself, who is Andre and why would I ask him those kinds of questions? Well, he is not Vince from ShamWow. He is a very, very smart guy. In fact, he built a world record holding Evo 3. It ran like at 823 at 180 miles per hour 10 years ago, and it held the world record for outright world record for four-wheel drive Evos for 3 years. he also set a world record in an Evo 10, I think it was. So he has built some of the most powerful, some of the fastest Evo drag cars in the world. He's built all kinds of engines. If you're familiar with their content, they have a great YouTube channel too, by the way. Jump over there and subscribe because you can follow their builds. You get a lot of great tech info there. And they have built every kind of engine. They're building a 1UZ right now for their GT86 race car. He's built 2Js, he built K motors, he's done it all. So a very smart guy, very technically knowledgeable. And we're very lucky to have his help with a 4G63 build, given his history with this motor. So in fact, we are using his clearances for the rods and the mains, which are a little bit looser than the factory, which he recommends for a higher performance engine like this when you're really turning up the boost and going big. He recommended going to 2 to 2.5 thou on the mains and 2 thou on the big end rods. So that's where we are for specs. And thanks again for watching, everyone. Really do appreciate the support. We're excited to be making progress with this engine build, which means sooner or later, we're gonna have a running Evo, which means I'm gonna get to beating up on it with my STI. You can see how all the galleries are connected.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. You're playing musical galleries.